that's something that a lot of times people don't realize. Oh, well, really, that's the same thing with every law in Judaism. Every law in Judaism, you can do it and do it totally wrong. Print it again? Is the printer ready?
I'm trying to figure out how not to be married.
What? Okay, I'm going to do it after class. After class, it'll be
Yes, I
time.
know.
It'll be time.
You gotta be careful where you step, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's go. So if you say to a lady, you are married to me on condition that your father agrees. Now, I want to mention, so once a lady is past age 12, her father doesn't have to agree anymore. It's up to her. She can get married. He doesn't have necessarily jurisdiction
So
over
this
her.
is only for women. or
But
men.
if someone says, no, I only want to do it on condition that your father agrees. If the father wants it, she's married. If he doesn't want it, or if he's silent, or, so now if he doesn't, if they say, hey dad, do you want me to get married? And he doesn't say anything, or he dies before he hears this, they're not married. If he says on condition that your father doesn't protest, if he protests, not married. If he doesn't protest or he dies, they are married. If now, let's say sorry, he's saying on condition that my father wants, right? Not her father, right?
She's saying.
He's saying, I'm getting married to you if my father agrees to this. So if he says, now he has the rights to say that, right? He has the rights to get married to whoever he wants. And if a teenager will go to someone and make a joke and do the marriage thing in front of two witnesses and do all those things right, then they're married. There's nothing you can do. There's no way out of it until you get divorced. So now, let's say he says, on condition my father doesn't protest, so the father dies, they're married. Let's say he dies, and afterwards the father hears about it, right? So now, were they married before he died? Well, now the lady will become a widow, right? And there's all sorts of other things which are tied to that. We tell the father, say you don't want it. Say you don't want it clearly. That way, retroactively, won't be married. There won't be any kiddushin, and she will not have to go into a levirate marriage. That's the most simple difference. She'll have to go to a levirate marriage. She'll have to marry the brother if they were married. If they weren't married, then nothing ever happened.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question? So this says, if one says to a woman, and so on, does she have any rights?
Yeah, she can say yes or no. Right? She can
Right,
say,
just like in a regular contract, if you don't sign it, you don't.
she can say, I'm not interested in
Yeah,
getting
but-
married.
Okay, that's implied.
She can say, yeah. A daughter always, a late girl always has rights to say yes or no, to accept it or not accept it. Except the only exception is if she's very young. She's a child, and she's a child. She doesn't have jurisdiction over herself, so her father does at that time. So she cannot accept money, accept marriage, but her father could in her place. Once she becomes of age, she's no longer under the jurisdiction of her father, and now she has her own hand. She has her own life, even if she's still living with her father.
So, back in the old days, sometimes it would take weeks, if not months, to find out if somebody's father died, right? Because communication was not instantaneous like it is today. So what if a man were to say, if my father consents, then we're consecrated, but finds out later on that he had died before he made that.
So then,
Before, that was the.
well, so then potentially, you don't want to put yourself in a situation like that, but then retroactively, you're not married, right? Retroactively, so you do have stories of things like that. If somebody does it as a joke or somebody says it and then they don't know what the father says, and then she gets married to someone else because they assume the father's out of the picture, and then really she was married to the first guy. She wasn't married to the second guy. Okay, if someone says to a lady, you are married to me with this amount of money on condition that I have 200 zuz, 200 of the currency, or base korafer, I have this amount of dirt. If there are witnesses that he has it, they're married. If there's not, we don't know if they're married. Maybe he has, maybe he doesn't. And maybe he's just saying that in order to, he's kind of making a joke, but he's kind of being not nice. If you're married, if he says you're married to me on condition that I have $200 or in this place, If he has in that place, they're married. If he doesn't have in that place, they are married from doubt. Maybe he has there, and or they are married from doubt. So, yeah, I mean, these are all examples. If someone is doubtfully married, she can't really get married to someone else until she takes care of the first marriage. Let's see, he says, I'm married to you on condition I show you money. Or I show you I have this area of dirt. They are married, and he has to show her. If he shows that someone else has it, or he shows that someone else has it, someone else's field, they're not married. He has to show his own. If he takes it as a loan, right, or he rents a field, etc., they're not married. It has to belong to him. Because when he says, I will show you, that implication is he's talking about his own stuff. Doesn't mean I will show you someone else's money, right? If he has a base core offer, and there are, I guess, deep, cracks. This is a field of dirt. 10 handbreadths, or big stones. Now, if they're full of water, we cannot count the big stones with it, because they are not worthy of planting, right? They're not proper field. And if they're not full of water, we can measure it because they are plantable. So what we're saying here is there's certain things. When you say, like, I have a big field, the implication is the field has a certain use, right? So if the field doesn't have a certain use, then you cannot include the unusable part in the condition. Crevices, yeah. So basically, here we're talking about a case where he's clearly trying to woo her with money, right? If he says to her, you are married to me on condition that you don't have any oaths that you took, personal oaths. And we find she has one of these three, that she doesn't eat meat, or she's not going to drink wine, or she's not going to wear jewelry. They're not married. If they find anything outside of this, even if he says, oh, I was talking about that type of oath, they are still married. If he says that you don't have on you any oath, even if they find things, she says, I swear I will not eat carobs, they are not married. So the first one is, he says,
eat meat or not drink wine or adorn herself with various colored garments?
Yeah, so basically the difference is the first one he says you don't have any oaths. So not having any oaths includes kind of bigger oaths. If he says you don't have any oath, and he specifies any whatsoever, so then they're not married even if she has random oaths she took upon herself. So those are, okay. If he says you're not married to me, okay, this is another one. You are married to me on condition that you don't have any blemishes. And he finds a certain type of blemish after they're married. Comes out, and there's specific blemishes, and we'll say what those are, then they're not married. If they're blemishes outside of the realm, then they are married. What are the blemishes we're talking about? Anything that is a Kohen. If you're a Kohen or a Levite, you cannot act in service. If you're mainly a Kohen, as much more than a Levite. But if you're a Kohen, you cannot act in service. So she has those things, and there are other ones that we'll explain later. Then she's not able to. She's not considered married. And the ones for a lady is she has bad smells coming out of her, bad breath, deep voice. One of her breasts is larger than the other one, a significant amount, a handbreadth. There's a handbreadth in between them. She was bit by a dog, and she has like a wound, and all these different ones.
Mole on her forehead.
So yeah, mole on her forehead even is very small, and even if it's so now, but if there is a mole which doesn't have any hair and or a big one, even though there's no hair, these are both women. So it's an interesting thing. But at the end of the day, if you're a Kohen and you have certain what we might even consider insignificant or just external blemishes, in the Torah you are unfit to serve in the temple. So they had other jobs for those Kohanim to do. Just to mention, a Kohen is not allowed to be a left-handed.
Really?
Correct. The Kohen's not allowed to be left-handed. So a lot of these things the Torah is pretty strict about the blemishes. But if a lady has them, then she is not. And you marry on condition that she has none of these things. Then the rule is she's not married. Okay, if you marry a lady and you find she has, if you marry a lady, stam, say you're married to me, regular, and she has one of these things, or she has one of the three types of major oaths, then they are married out of doubt. Now let's say you go and you say, I'm married to you on condition. Let me just close the door. I'm married to you on condition that you don't have any oaths whatsoever. And she goes, she has oaths. And then she goes and she has oaths. And then she goes and she goes to a chacham, who's someone who's halachically deemed to annul her oaths. So now she becomes married to you. Okay. If he marries on condition she has no blemishes and she has blemishes and she goes to a doctor and heals them, she's not married. However, if he makes a condition that she doesn't have oaths and she doesn't have blemishes and she has oaths and she goes and she fixes them, then they are married. Sorry, that he doesn't have any blemishes. If he goes and fixes them, then they're married. Because apparently in those days, women who had blemishes that healed were still considered not perfect but men else on the other hand, when they heal them, they're considered, the woman doesn't mind if a man heals it, but many men would mind even if a lady healed it. Now, a lot of these things are, when you get married, if there is something in your mind which is unintended. So it's the same thing with the lady. If you say, here, look, I need 8 cents to betroth you, right? And a fake gold-plated ring costs $20 and a gold ring costs $200. And I betroth you with a gold-plated ring, and you say, hey, as far as you know, you'll never know, she'll never know, you're not married, because she, in her mind, assumed that she's getting married for something different. So a lot of these things have to do with what the average male or average female thinks about.
Is she allowed to have conditions so that she could say, can she say yes on the condition that you have no blemishes and you've not taken vows, or
correct?
So the reverse
is a little different, because we said if she can make conditions as well, right? She can make conditions as well. Now here in this specific case, we said if he said you don't have blemishes and she has blemishes, and then she goes to a doctor and heals them, it's still considered as if she has blemishes in this context. But if he says I don't have blemishes and he goes to a doctor, it's considered if he doesn't. And this is just the rabbis in the times of the Talmudic era. They're almost taking a poll and they're understanding what people think the average person thinks, right? So because when you do this transaction, we don't want anyone to feel like they were cheated.
So this can evolve into a full-fledged negotiation?
It can, absolutely. And typically when people make negotiations when they get married, which they do all the time, people do make negotiations. Sometimes parents will make negotiations that, they'll say, we'll both chip in and get them a house, or we'll chip in and get them an apartment, or we'll chip in and help them get themselves off their feet. We'll invest in their business, invest in their schooling, whatever it is. Typically, those negotiations are not part of the marriage contract, just because the rabbis don't want to confuse it. What the rabbis do nowadays, and what people do nowadays, is we want to make the process as simple and as foolproof as possible. So they can make negotiations. That is correct. All these negotiations are kind of relevant after the fact. If you're joking around and you make negotiations, then you are married, and the negotiations go through, they're married. And then there are all these details. Wait, did she say this? Did he say that? Did he mean this? Did he mean that? But nowadays we try to get married with the most minimal amount of negotiations. And the negotiations that we do are totally out of the contract, totally out of the marriage. In other words, if let's say the husband and the two sides of the family say, okay, we'll both chip in the wedding 50-50, and one family doesn't, we don't want that should affect the marriage. In other words, we don't want that we say, okay, forget this thing, even though maybe they would have said before, oh, we thought we were getting married to an honest family or an honest person. Maybe they didn't say that before. We don't want that. We typically nowadays want it to be either fully married or fully divorced to avoid all conflict.
Are these things written down that are being discussed here?
What do you
These
mean?
conditions?
They're all. What do you mean?
Well,
They're written here.
No. If he says to her, "I'll marry you if you have no blemishes or no vows."
Yeah. Well, they don't have to write it down. They don't have to. They should, but they don't have to. But it has to be done in front of two witnesses. So.
The imposing of the conditions.
Oh yeah, because that anything which is in the marriage has to be done for two witnesses, and
That's what I was
the
asking.
witnesses of marriage are unique in the sense that other things, if I make a promise to David and there's no witnesses, even if there's no witnesses, God is a witness. I have to keep my word, right? And if I don't keep my word, that's between me. He might not be able to prove anything in court because he'll say, "You promised it," and I'll say, "I didn't," and he can't prove it because my word is as good as his word in the court. However, in the marriage, the witnesses are an integral part of the marriage. In other words, the witnesses make the marriage. They're not just there to say it happened because we need proof. They make the marriage. So the witnesses here are quite important. If you don't have witnesses in these things, so then they're not married. Okay, if he says you're married with, okay, if he says you're married to me with this on condition that I give $200 to you from now until 30 days. If he gives it between 30, they're married. If 30 days pass, they're not married. He said you're married with this after 30 days, married with this money after 30 days. Even though he used up all the money, they're married after 30 days. If he returns or he goes back on it and he says I changed my mind within those 30 days, they are not married. If someone comes, a second person comes within the 30 days, and she receives money from him. So one guy says, here, here's money. You're married to me after 30 days. So we're not married now, right? After 30 days, we're married. A second guy comes and he betroths her in the middle of 30 days. He's married to the second guy because she wasn't really married. He was saying he made a contract, and it's like the contract didn't happen after 30 days.
So she could accept the 30-day offer, and then a second guy comes and says,
yeah.
"Will you marry me?" but offers no conditions.
Well, we'll see. Let's say now, here's the next case. If he says, let's say he says, you're married to me now, and after 30 days, you'll get this money. Now, what's the rule? So now what's the difference? The first case, he says, you're married to me after 30 days. In other words, you are not married to me until 30 days. So a second guy comes and marries her. You weren't married to the first guy. You were going to be married to him after 30 days, right? Now,
she had accepted the offer.
She accepted the offer, but the offer didn't actually happen yet. She's not married. So could be she was dishonest to him, right? But she's married to the second guy. In the second case, it says, you're married to me now on condition that I give you money 30 days. And then a second guy comes. We're not sure if she's married to both of them, to either of them. We're not sure who she's married to. So therefore, she has to get a divorce document.
Did this sort of thing happen a lot back in the old days? I mean,
Could be.
why would they write all this stuff out unless it did? Right?
Could be it did.
My grandmom was obsessed with details.
Could be it happened. I assume that it happened. Again, nowadays we kind of have like a very fixed marriage order. And the reason why we do that is because we know, back then, the financial transactions and Jewish law were kind of on equal status. Nowadays people will say, it's just Jewish law, right? But they really are on equal status. In other words, if you get married to someone according to Jewish law, it's a very serious thing. But people sometimes will be like, oh, is this some rabbi, some prayer? So back then they were serious. These things were very serious. People knew that getting married and buying a property with lawyers was, in fact, getting married is even more serious. So, okay, if you get married from now until 30 days and someone else comes, you're married to me now until after 20 days, and then someone else comes and says, you're married to me from now until 10 days, even if there are 100 people like that, she needs a divorce from each one.
So these laws are derived from laws of possession.
And the Torah, yeah.
So if I come to you and I say, I will buy your an object from you, not marriage, just an object, and I will pay you and take delivery in 30 days. But I haven't taken possession. That is not still a valid contract?
The answer is so the laws of Kenyan is a whole different subject, but you have to do it right. You have to do it right if you want to do it. So, but marriage is different because marriage requires a minimal amount of money. When you acquire something, when you buy something, it doesn't acquire any money. But marriage acquires a minimal amount of money. In other words, you cannot say to her, I will marry you with 7 cents. And she says, yeah, 7 cents is fine. Oh, you don't need to give me anything. The Torah says marriage requires the money. So that's why it's a little different. But yes, correct. You have to do, according to Jewish law, you would have to do the contract properly. And there are times where people will do it according to Jewish law, and then they get a better deal, and they back out and they say, oh, well, civil law, you can't take it away from me. And that's considered very wrong. Jewish people are absolutely not supposed to use civil courts. We're not supposed to use civil courts. That's a mitzvah in the Torah. And when a lot of times, unfortunately, in the Jewish community, sometimes people will say, hey, I have a loophole, Paul bought it in the Bezdin, but he can't enforce it in civil law because civil law requires XYZ. Let's go there and let him go and take this product from me. So, but marriage has its own laws in the sense that marriage is, on one hand, it's a financial transaction. On the other hand, it's not a regular financial transaction.
So sorry about the digression, but in today's world, let's say here in the U.S.,
Yeah.
2 Torah observant Jews make an agreement to engage in a transaction.
Yeah.
One would assume they're bound, they would assume, since they're observant, they would be bound by Torah law.
Correct. And if they really want to do it properly, they'll go to a religious bezdin and they'll say, we want to both be bound by Torah law and show we're bound by Torah law, and we want to do your contract. And some bezdins nowadays will say, okay, but we have a lawyer that works for us who's going to do a civil thing because there have been times where people say like, oh, I don't like the Torah law, and it's not enforceable by the civil law. Torah law is not enforceable by civil law, so we'll just go to civil court. And it's a lot of times unfair to one of the parties who wants to follow Torah law. And he says, hey, 1 second, we agreed to follow Torah law. This happens unfortunately quite commonly in the rabbinical court in America and stuff like that. But it's a mitzvah that the guy who is deviating from Torah law is considered like a sin. You know, it's wrong.
He's behaving
un-Torah legal. He's not behaving according to Torah law.
So if you had an observant Jew engaging in a transaction with a non-observant Jew, they're both Jews, but one is and one isn't observant. For the Torah observant Jew to have his side of the transaction protected by Torah law, he would want a civil contract because he knows he's the other.
Yeah, and sometimes a lot of times the rabbinical court will say, you better get a civil contract because they'll even say, we don't know, you know, David, let's say, he might have a bad history with coming to rabbinical court. So we don't know, and they'll say that. And they'll say, like, unfortunately, you know, or also you have all the time Jews who, they're unaware of the really, Torah law is more strict and more important than civil law for a Jew. But because we're in exile, the Torah law doesn't have enforceable gravity. So now really when you make a contract with someone, you shouldn't need to enforce it. In other words, it should be done in a way that you both say, oh, okay, we got this contract, so we both honor the contract. But Torah law basically, but yeah, so like, you know, now weddings are different because you could say, hey, you can't prove we're married according to civil law, but you are married, and now your kids are going to be, or whatever, you're going to ruin different aspects of your life and the other person's life. So these are, and you do have always, you do have the cases of agunas. Yeah. So agunas, you know, from my experience, like I've never actually dealt with a case of aguna, but I've met different agunas, but they're quite complicated. And a lot of the cases actually have to do with the husband using his halachic leverage of not giving a divorce document, and the wife using her legal civil leverage, because in civil law the wife has certain precedence over rights over the children, which the husband doesn't have. So a lot of times she's saying, okay, well, you're not going to see your kids anymore, and he says, well, you're not going to get divorced. And there is a lot of times they're using the leverage when really they should dump the civil law. You might need to do civil law in order because you need protection to enforce, but really they should both go to the, and really they should both act like, act like mention, act like adults, and work out and do whatever's best for the children in order to work it out. But that's a lot of times what happens, where you have the civil law and the Jewish law. Jewish law has no legal gravity, of enforceable gravity, and the civil law does. And then you have to, that's the mess. And in the olden days, what they would do is, and they still do it nowadays, is if you don't come to the rabbinical court, they excommunicate you. And excommunication means no one's allowed to do business with you. No one's allowed to count you in a minion. You're not allowed to join the community things. Now, even that nowadays doesn't have a lot of gravity, because you just move to another city, or you just don't come to shul anymore. You don't. In the olden days, when you lived in the ghetto, if you were excommunicated, well, there goes your business. No one's going to buy from you anymore. Nowadays, you say, okay, we don't enforce the excommunication on the Gentiles, on the non-religious. So what happens sometimes is that the excommunication does not do much, but the excommunication does have spiritual gravity, but people don't tend to, we spoke last night.
A still or something like that, it would.
So it should have physical gravity. It should have material gravity. But nowadays we follow the animal's soul. Like a lot of times people will be like, "Oh yeah,